The election duet, sung by Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos and his wife Imelda. It was all part of a recent controversial general election, with Marcos and his wife campaigning non-stop in public, while the leader of the opposition directed his campaign from a prison cell. The aim was to elect members of a National Assembly for the first time since Marcos proclaimed martial law and took personal control of the country 5.5 years ago. Whatever the outcome, Marcos was to stay on as president. But Mrs. Marcos was standing as a candidate for one of the 21 seats in the Manila area. So it was very much a husband and wife campaign, something Filipinos have got used to since Marcos took control. Some 23 million Filipinos had registered to vote in the general election. It was their first chance in 7 years to vote for anyone except Marcos. Since declaring martial law, Marcos has won 4 referenda on whether or not he should stay in power. But his critics have said the voting was rigged every time. Voter turnout this time was nearly 90%, according to election officials. The polling was supervised by teachers who'd been given a 20% pay rise not long before the election. Officials stressed that there were strict precautions to prevent ballot rigging. The precautions included fingerprinting everyone who voted. This had a double benefit in helping to keep proper records in a country where many people can't read or write. After the count, officials said over 60% of the votes had gone to government candidates, another resounding victory for the president. But according to his critics, it couldn't have been otherwise. The president's party, the KBL, got saturation coverage from the pro-government newspapers, radio and television. They virtually ignored the opposition campaign. In fact, Marcos's critics said he'd called the election to make it look as if his regime was returning to democracy. He's been criticized by the International Commission of Jurists and the Roman Catholic Church for allegedly denying civil rights. He's also been under pressure from the United States, on which he's heavily dependent for economic and military aid. When Marcos, a former lawyer, proclaimed martial law, he said it was necessary to save the Philippines from a revolutionary communist takeover. He has fought several campaigns against communist guerrillas, and he's also launched a series of reforms to stamp out corruption and help the peasants own their land. But his critics say no real reforms taken place, and that corruption's got even worse. The president's main campaign theme was that only his party could solve the problems the country faces, like an overseas debt running into thousands of millions of dollars. He accuses his opponents of being communists or communist sympathizers. Marcos's wife Imelda is seen by many as the real power behind her husband's regime. As governor of Manila, her job in the election campaign was to lead the KBL's candidates in the capital, the only place where they faced any real opposition. The party took all 21 seats there, an ample tribute to her political skill. Everywhere she went, her message was the same. I can tell the president what you need here, and you know that Imelda always gets action. When Mrs. Marcos went to vote near her Manila home on election day, she was still campaigning, and the crowd showed they loved her. The voting was the end of a grueling campaign for the president's 48-year-old wife. Observers said she'd spent 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, simply making speeches. She's been nicknamed Superwife and the Iron Butterfly. But for all that, friends say Imelda is a deeply committed politician who believes she's closely associated with her people's destiny. Her first claim to fame was when she won the Miss Manila beauty title as a teenager. Since then, she's gone on to become almost a patron saint for the dispossessed masses. But Mrs. Marcos is also an astute businesswoman. In 1971, her personal fortune was estimated at $200 million. More recently, she was listed as being among the world's 10 richest women, but she denies this. The opposition was coordinated by Lorenzo Tanada in the absence of the jailed Benigno Aquino. Various opposition groups came together under the name Laban, which simply means fight. A request from Laban for party workers to accompany ballot boxes from the polling stations to the counting center was at first accepted by election officials, but later refused. Tanada explained why they feared the election wouldn't be fair.
We have placed on record our request that we be furnished not only the voters that voted as of December 1977, last referendum, the new voters that have been registered, the new and until now undisclosed voting centers. I'm afraid, sir, that it is in these voting centers whose location we do not know, the votes will be manufactured.
But the most bizarre aspect of the election campaign must be Aquino running as candidate from his prison cell. Last November, he faced a military tribunal that found him guilty of murder and subversion charges, then sentenced him to death. The case is now under review. But Aquino stays in custody, along with many others detained without any kind of trial since the declaration of martial law. The declaration prevented a presidential election, which many Filipinos thought Aquino would win. Indeed, he's so highly respected, television cameras were taken to the military jail for him to address the people. Questioners tried to probe alleged links between him and the American Central Intelligence Agency. He claimed the few links he did have were in the national interest.
If you're an American and you're a CIA, there is nothing.
Then he used the occasion to promote Laban policies and criticize Marcos.
Very bad, and I never tolerate that. And we have a law, I think, it's a woman law that prohibits anybody from becoming an agent of a foreign power.
Aquino's daughter, guest of honor at this Laban election meeting, is a rallying point for the opposition. Through her, the president's opponents hear, loud and clear, the voice of her father.
Barikan Bongkayo, Kabigaw David De Leon Ferrer, Gonzales Gingona, Herrera Lucero, Maceda Martinez, Mitra Pimentel Planas, Rama Roses, Rodrigo Rondon Santos. Maraming salamat po.
On the eve of the elections, Manila rang with a cacophony of blaring motorcar horns, banging pots and pans, and rattling tins. Opposition supporters throughout the city were answering the call to sound their support, so their imprisoned leader, unable to see his followers, could at least hear them. The planned 5-minute outburst of orchestrated civil disobedience lasted more than 3 hours. As the election campaign drew to a climax, opposition rallies became an almost nightly affair. Only a few months ago, riot police would have broken up any attempt to hold a rally against the government. Only 4 days before the election, a series of fires and bombings hit the city, the most serious being in the Tondo slum district, where about 46 people were injured. The Tondo fires blazed out of control for nearly 8 hours, fanned by a strong tropical breeze, and by the morning, the tinder-dry homes of about 20,000 people had been gutted. Some observers of the Philippine scene have taken this as a symbol of the situation today. It happened in the slums, whose very existence, they say, is a reminder of how much inequality there is in the Philippines, inequality which Marcos had promised to eradicate. Added to this kind of dissension, there are wider conflicts. In the southern provinces, the long-standing war with the Muslim separatists is still raging. And according to latest reports, the Muslims have now made a tactical alliance with Marcos's other enemies, the pro-Chinese communists of the New People's Army. Taken all together, they form a bundle of problems that would challenge any national leader. In the past, President Marcos has maintained that only a firm hand could cope with them. But in doing that, he's had to squash the opposition so thoroughly that a backlash could only be expected. And whether the latest elections were rigged or not, there seems to be growing evidence of a discontent that was not expressed at the ballot box.